At 57 years old, Robert Taylor dropped a bombshell that rocked Hollywood to its core. The silver-haired legend, once considered the most handsome man in America, finally revealed the dark secrets behind his marriage to Barbara Stanwyck. What he exposed was so shocking that it destroyed the fairy tale millions of fans had believed for decades. For years, Hollywood had painted their union as the perfect love story. Magazine covers showed them smiling, arm in arm, the picture of marital bliss. But according to Taylor himself, it was all a lie, a carefully crafted illusion that hid a toxic relationship filled with power games, emotional manipulation, and what he called absolutely disgusting behavior behind closed doors. Robert Taylor wasn't born into Hollywood royalty. He entered the world as Spangler Arlington Brew on August 5, 1911, in the tiny farming town of Philly, Nebraska. His humble beginnings in America's heartland gave him values that would later clash violently with Hollywood's corrupt culture. His parents raised him to be honest, hardworking, and respectful, qualities that would make him an easy target for the predators lurking in Tinseltown. As a young man with dreams bigger than his small town could contain, Taylor packed his bags for Los Angeles. He enrolled at the University of Southern California to study engineering, but destiny had other plans. His striking good looks and natural charisma caught the attention of talent scouts prowling college campuses like vultures looking for fresh meat. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, one of Hollywood's most ruthless studios, saw dollar signs in his handsome face and signed him to a contract that would change his life forever, and not always for the better. The studio machine immediately went to work molding Taylor into their ideal leading man. They changed his name, his image, even his personality to fit their market in. E.g. needs. Like so many young actors before and after him, Taylor became a product to be packaged and sold to the masses. His early films showcased his versatility, romantic dramas, action adventures, historical epics, but behind the glamorous facade, the studio controlled every aspect of his life. Taylor's breakthrough role came in 1936 when he starred opposite the legendary but notoriously difficult Greta Garbo in Camille. Working with Garbo was like dancing with a beautiful but dangerous snake. She was known for her ice-cold personality and her ability to destroy careers with a single word to the right studio executive. But Taylor survived the experience and even thrived, proving he could handle Hollywood's most challenging personalities. Little did he know this skill would be tested to its limits in his personal life. Waterloo Bridge, in 1940, cemented Taylor's reputation as one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. Audiences couldn't get enough of his combination of masculine strength and emotional vulnerability. He seemed like the perfect man, handsome, talented, and apparently stable. But perfection in Hollywood is always an illusion, and Taylor was about to learn this lesson in the most painful way possible. Enter Barbara Stanwyck, a woman who would become both his greatest professional partner and his personal nightmare. When they met, Stanwyck was already established as one of Hollywood's most powerful actresses. She had clawed her way to the top in an industry that chewed up women and spit them out. Her reputation for toughness was legendary, but few knew just how ruthless she could be when crossed. Their courtship lasted 3 years, during which the Hollywood publicity machine worked overtime to sell their romance to the public. Every date was photographed, every public appearance carefully staged. On May 14, 1939, they married in what appeared to be a fairy tale ceremony in San Diego, California. The wedding party read like a who's who of Hollywood royalty, with Marion Marks, wife of comedian Zeppo Marks, serving as matron of honor. But according to Taylor's later shocking revelations, their marriage was doomed from the start. The problems began immediately, rooted in a fundamental power imbalance that poisoned their relationship from day one. Stanwyck was the bigger star, the more experienced actor, and she never let Taylor forget it. "People have no idea what really went on in that house," Taylor would later confess, his voice heavy with years of suppressed anger and resentment. Barbara wasn't just controlling, she was absolutely ruthless. She treated our marriage like a business merger, not a love story. The couple's home included Barbara's adopted son, Anthony Tony Dion, from her previous marriage to actor Frank Fay. Taylor tried to be a good stepfather, but even his relationship with the boy became a source of conflict. Stanwyck used Tony as a weapon, manipulating the situation to maintain control over every aspect of their domestic life. Hollywood insiders began to whisper about trouble in paradise long before the public caught on. At parties and premieres, those close to the couple noticed the tension. Taylor would stand silently while Stanwyck dominated conversations, her sharp wit cutting down anyone who dared to disagree with her. Friends watched as Taylor slowly transformed from a confident leading man into a shell of his former self. She had this way of making you feel worthless with just a look, Taylor revealed years later. In public, she'd smile and play the devoted wife. But behind closed doors, she was a completely different person. The things she said to me, the way she treated me, it was psychological warfare. The marriage limped along for nearly 12 agonizing years. Taylor threw himself into his work, taking roles that kept him away from home for months at a time. Colleagues noticed he seemed relieved when filming took him to distant locations, away from Stanwyck's suffocating presence. But even thousands of miles away, her influence followed him through phone calls filled with criticism and demands. Industry veterans who worked with both actors during this period paint a disturbing picture of their relationship. On sets where they appeared together, the atmosphere was so tense that crew members would find excuses to stay away. Stanwyck would publicly humiliate Taylor, correcting his performances and undermining his authority as a leading man. Barbara had this need to dominate every situation, recalled one director who worked with them both. With Robert, it was like watching a predator toy with its prey. She seemed to enjoy making him squirm. The breaking point came in the late 1940s when Taylor began to secretly document the abuse he was suffering. Friends later revealed that he kept a private journal detailing Stanwyck's behavior, describing incidents that would shock even hardened Hollywood veterans. The psychological manipulation, the public humiliations, the constant criticism. It all took its toll on a man who had once been considered the epitome of masculine confidence. In February 1951, Stanwyck filed for divorce, but not before orchestrating a publicity campaign that painted her as the wronged party. The Hollywood press, many of whom were afraid of her power and influence, largely went along with her version of events. Taylor, devastated and emotionally broken, said nothing publicly about what had really happened behind closed doors. I was so damaged by that point that I couldn't even defend myself, Taylor later admitted. She had systematically destroyed my confidence, my self-worth, everything that made me who I was. The divorce was almost a relief, but the damage was already done. But Taylor's nightmare wasn't over. Even after their divorce, Stanwyck continued to wield influence over his career. Studio executives, many of whom feared her wrath, began passing over Taylor for major roles. His career, once so promising, began to stagnate as whispers spread through Hollywood's power corridors. Salvation came in the form of Ursula Theis, a beautiful German actress who arrived in Hollywood in 1952. Unlike the predatory relationships that defined much of Hollywood, Taylor's courtship of Ursula was genuine and healing. She had escaped war-torn Europe and understood suffering in ways that spoiled Hollywood royalty never could. Their wedding in Jackson Hole, Wyoming on May 23, 1954, was deliberately chosen to be as far from Hollywood's toxic atmosphere as possible. The outdoor ceremony represented Taylor's attempt to reclaim his authentic self, away from the manufactured glamour that had nearly destroyed him. With Ursula, Taylor finally experienced what a healthy relationship could be. They had 2 children together, Terrence in 1955 and Tessa in 1959, and Taylor embraced fatherhood with the joy of a man who had finally found peace. He also became stepfather to Ursula's children from her previous marriage, Manuela and Michael Theis, treating them with the love and respect he had never received from Stanwyck. But Hollywood's curse seemed to follow Taylor even into his happiness. In 1969, just weeks before Taylor's own death from lung cancer, tragedy struck when Michael Theis was found dead in a West Los Angeles motel room, victim of a drug overdose. The young man had struggled with mental health issues and addiction, problems that began during his troubled adolescence. Michael's death was particularly devastating because of his history of disturbing behavior. In 1964, he had been institutionalized after attempting to poison his father with insecticide, an incident that horrified the family and highlighted the depth of his psychological problems. Taylor had tried desperately to help his troubled stepson, but the demons that haunted the young man proved too powerful. As Taylor faced his own mortality in 1969, dying of lung cancer at just 57 years old, he made a decision that would shock Hollywood and destroy one of its most carefully preserved myths. In a series of interviews that wouldn't be fully revealed until years later, he finally told the truth about his marriage to Barbara Stanwyck. "I've kept quiet for 18 years, Taylor said, his voice weak but determined. "But I won't take these secrets to my grave. People need to know what really happened, what that woman put me through." Taylor's revelations were explosive. He described a marriage that was not only loveless, but actively destructive, filled with psychological abuse that left him permanently scarred. According to Taylor, Stanwyck had used their marriage as a tool to advance her own career while systematically destroying his confidence and self-worth. The public saw Barbara Stanwyck, the actress, tough, independent, admirable, Taylor explained. But Barbara Stanwyck, the wife, was a monster. She was cruel in ways that most people couldn't imagine. She took pleasure in breaking me down, piece by piece. Taylor revealed that many of their public appearances had been orchestrated by MGM studio executives who saw their marriage as good publicity. The studio had encouraged the union, seeing Stanwyck's established reputation as perfect cover for their investment in Taylor's career. But what started as a business arrangement became a prison for Taylor. "The studio loved our marriage because it made both of us more valuable," Taylor confessed. "But they didn't care what it cost me personally. I was just another asset to be managed and exploited." Perhaps most damaging were Taylor's claims about Stanwyck's behavior in private. He described a woman who was capable of extraordinary cruelty, who seemed to feed off his humiliation and pain. The psychological warfare was constant and devastating. "She had this ability to find your weakest point and attack it mercilessly," Taylor recalled. "She would tear me down with words that cut like knives, then act like nothing had happened when we were in public. It was like living with someone who had two completely different personalities." Taylor also revealed the financial manipulation that had kept him trapped in the marriage. Stanwyck, who was more established and financially savvy, had structured their finances in ways that made it difficult for Taylor to leave. She controlled their joint assets and used money as another tool of control. "I felt like a prisoner in my own life," Taylor admitted. "She had me convinced that I couldn't survive without her, that my career would be over if we divorced. It took me years to realize that staying was actually destroying me." The most shocking revelation was Taylor's claim that Stanwyck had actively sabotaged his career opportunities when she sensed he was pulling away from her control. She had used her influence with directors and producers to limit his options, keeping him dependent on her support. "She wanted to be the star in our relationship, and she was willing to destroy my career to make sure that happened," Taylor said bitterly. "Some of the roles I lost, some of the opportunities that vanished. I found out later that she had been working behind the scenes to make sure I stayed in my place." Taylor's confessions painted a picture of Hollywood's golden age that was far darker than the public image. Behind the glamorous facades and romantic storylines were real people trapped in toxic relationships, controlled by ruthless studio executives who cared more about profits than human dignity. "People think they want the life of a movie star," Taylor said in one of his final interviews. "But they have no idea what it really costs. The price isn't just your privacy or your freedom. Sometimes it's your soul." The truth about Taylor and Stanwyck's marriage remained largely hidden for decades, buried by Hollywood's powerful publicity machine and Stanwyck's own influence. But as more details emerged over the years, a darker picture began to form of one of Hollywood's most celebrated couples. Industry insiders who had remained silent during Stanwyck's lifetime began to speak more openly about what they had witnessed. Stories emerged of her legendary temper, her ruthless treatment of colleagues, and her need to dominate every situation. The woman who had been celebrated as a feminist icon was revealed to be capable of extraordinary cruelty to those closest to her. Taylor's story serves as a warning about the price of fame and the dark side of Hollywood's golden age. Behind the beautiful photographs and romantic movies were real people suffering in silence, trapped by contracts, publicity requirements, and the need to maintain perfect images for the public. The marriage that had once been held up as the ideal Hollywood romance was exposed as a cautionary tale about power, manipulation, and the cost of living a lie. Robert Taylor's final act of courage was telling the truth about what he had endured, even though it meant destroying the myth that had defined much of his public life. His revelations remind us that the stories we see on screen are just that. Stories. The real lives of Hollywood. His biggest stars were often far more complicated and painful than their fans ever imagined. In Taylor's case, the price of stardom was nearly everything that made life worth living.